Thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Stephen Moe, and this is Kris and Morrison. And we come from Perryfield Lawyers, as you can see up there. We call this a legal mashup because what we want to do is first of all, we want to answer your questions, but we don't want it to be limited to any one particular topic. So the sector, or the area that we're focusing on tonight, is social enterprises, not-for-profits, and charity. And there's a lot of crossover between those, and some might even say what is one and what is the other. So we want to explore a little bit of that, and I know some of you have ideas for social enterprises or charities or not-for-profits, so we're really keen to hear from you as well. This isn't just we're going to talk at you all evening, but to start with, I just wanted to ask a question which has to do with this. First of all, what is this? An avocado. And what's the potential that this avocado has? I mean, yeah, it's sustenance. You could put it on toast. And I heard somebody say, be a tree. That's the real potential of this, isn't it? And the amazing thing is if you buy this from a grocery store and you take the seed, and if you look it up on YouTube, you can find out, you put little toothpicks in it and put the bottom part in water, it will actually start growing. I don't think it will probably produce down here, but it will grow. So this is an avocado tree that I've started growing, and you can see the seed there at the bottom. So one of the things that we're trying to do here is to empower each of you, because each of you have seeds of ideas, and we want to empower you to be able to grow and flourish. And what we find is that we get the same questions over and over from people who are keen to start a social enterprise or a charity or whatever. And so this is going to be an efficient way for us to deal with it, because all of you probably have similar questions and you're on a journey. So that's really the purpose of this evening. So just a little bit of background about me, and then Kris will introduce himself. So as you can hear, I have an accent, but you have to be careful not to let assumptions guide you too far, because I actually moved to New Zealand when I was 7 years old. So I actually grew up here. My dad was a marine biologist, a really unusual job, and it brought us here to raise salmon. So I actually went to high school here in Christchurch. I went to Canterbury University. I worked in Wellington for 3 years at a national law firm, and then I went overseas for 11 years. And I was in London for 3 years, in Tokyo for 4 years, and Sydney for 4 years. So my kids came home singing the Australian national anthem, and we thought, oh, this is interesting, identity is forming. And it's a beautiful place, but is this where we want to be long term? So we came back about 2.5 years ago, and I joined Perryfield because I felt like they were a firm. It was a nice medium-sized firm that does a bit of everything, and that could have a real impact and make a difference there. So that's a little bit about me and my background, and Kris, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name's Kris. I am a lawyer at Perryfield. I've been with Perryfield for about 16 years. 2002 I started. That's when I shifted to Christchurch as well, so I'm originally from the North Island. However, I have 6 children, and 4 of them were born in the South Island, and they've all sort of grown up here, so they certainly consider themselves mainlanders, I guess. So I think I'm stuck here now, for better or for worse, and actually I don't have a problem with that. I love Canterbury, and love being able to get out into the mountains and do a bit of skiing or go for a walk and all those sorts of things. So it's a great place to live. But in terms of work, I have just an interest in helping people to move their purpose along in terms of what they're trying to achieve, and certainly a desire personally to work in a way that puts food on the table for my family, but that actually has some meaning behind it as well, and is helping people to pursue the purposes that they have that are a bit beyond just sort of financial provision for their family. And so something like this, just a good opportunity, I hope, to help people a little bit further along the way with some of those kinds of ambitions.
Yeah, that's great. So what we'll do is we thought we'd just talk about a few topics to start with, and then we're going to open it up for questions and then just have some interaction. And then it's up to you to guide us as to where we go. We don't really have a set agenda, but I think one thing that probably does unite us is an interest in social enterprise. So I thought we'd start there. So just a question, like how many of you are interested in starting a social enterprise, or you have one already, or it's a sector? Yeah, so it's a number of hands. So just to begin with, I'll just say a few words and then Kris can fill in anything that I've left out. The first thing is, what is a social enterprise? And I think the word itself I find is quite helpful, because you've got social, which has to do with the purpose side of what the endeavor is trying to do. So whether that's an environmental or some humanitarian or some social thing. And then the enterprise side, which is the profit side. And it's the business that's sustainable and making money. And traditionally, I think what we've done is said, well, business is about the mind and, making hard decisions and numbers. So that's over here, and we focus on profit. And purpose, that's kind of about the heart. What is it that's beating within you? Like if there's a purpose behind it, and that's more of a softer thing. So that's more of a charity type of thing. And you end up with this separation between sort of the mind of business focused on profit and the heart of charity focused on purpose. So social enterprise really tries to take the mind of business and the heart of charity and bring them back together, align them together. And I found that that's a helpful way to think about it, because it can be difficult to work out what it is we're even talking about when we're meaning social enterprise. And that's partly because there is no legal definition of social enterprise in New Zealand. So you can be a charitable entity, or you can be a non-charitable entity. There's no sort of tick this box and you're definitely a social enterprise. So this is something that Akina is looking at quite a lot, and if you haven't come across them, you should check out their website. They've got a lot of great resources, but they're doing some scoping around legal structures and what should or shouldn't be within the definition of social enterprise. And it's actually quite a fun project, and I get to be part of it, talking with social enterprises and working out what would be good or what would not be good if we were going to have some kind of a legal structure. So it's kind of early days, there's many discussions to be had, and it needs lots of voices. But just setting the scene, the point is, there's no, you might, on the road, you might choose to become a limited liability company, or you might choose to become a charity, and you can still be a social enterprise, whichever road that you're going down. So the key question that I always ask people is, so let's say you've got your idea, the first question is always, where do you want to be in 5 years or in 10 years? And the reason that's important to ask is that if you decide, I've kind of laid out the two roads, right? The charity side and the for-profit business side. If you choose to go down the charity road, then there's certain implications of that, and that has to do with the fact that you can't have private gain from having set up a charity. So Kris and I have seen examples where people, 10, 15 years ago, they set up a charity, they've worked in it for years and years. Setting up a charity or anything, it's going to be blood, sweat, and tears. The entrepreneurial journey is not easy. And then they get, 10 or 15 years in, and they want to move on, and they've been able to draw a salary or, be employed, but they actually don't own themselves the intellectual property or the charity. So they get lots of pats on the back, well done, but maybe don't get the ability to sell what they've done. So that's, I guess, one consideration. And then the other side is the for-profit company. Like that, if you go down that route, then you are able to one day sell things and sell shares or gain investment into it. So that's a positive of that side of things. But equally, it's actually quite hard to get investors when you're explaining to them that there's other purposes beyond profit in what you're trying to do. So you're kind of left in the middle of wanting the best of being a charity and the best of being a for-profit company sometimes. But the key point here is, in 5 or 10 years, do you want to be making some money privately or personally, or is it more about the cause that you're involved in and promoting the cause? And I think we see both examples of people who come through our doors, that some people genuinely, it's just about the purpose. We just want to achieve it. It doesn't matter about the money. But for other people, it is important that there's, income being generated and potentially dividends or profits that go to them privately. And I actually don't have a problem with that. I think it'd be great to encourage more people to be doing social enterprises that actually generate profits, so that we didn't just have people going out to create the next Facebook, or that they actually had greater goals in mind, that they were giving back through whatever it is that they've chosen to do. And one way to encourage that would be to say, hey, you don't have to be a martyr to charity and give up everything. If you've got a great idea, there's actually this middle way, which is sort of the social enterprise. So that's a really high-level overview of some of my own thinking and thoughts, having talked with many social enterprises. And we have put out this little booklet called Social Enterprises in New Zealand, a legal handbook, which if you want, I can email to any of you. So it's just a PDF. This is probably the last copy. We've kind of run out. But I'm happy to email that out to people. So just contact me if you're interested. So anyway, that's some of the thinking around social enterprise. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah. Before we take a question, Kris, do you have anything you wanted to say on social enterprise?
No, what I'd like to do is just invite a bit of feedback from everyone. So a few of you put your hands up and said that you were, I'm not sure whether, I can't remember the question now, whether it was you were interested in social enterprise or involved with social enterprise. For those of you who are involved with a social enterprise, what sort of legal structure sits behind that social enterprise? I'd be interested to hear what road you've taken in that sense. Yep.
So I've just recently joined a social enterprise called LRTT, which stands for Limited Resource Teacher Training.
Okay.
They're based in the UK, and both they have a UK charity as well as a company, and I forget exactly how the split. Yeah, but it's a little bit different to how things are done.
And are they now setting up in New Zealand as well?
Yeah, so there's now 2 of us based in New Zealand, so we're kind of now looking at what we do here. Do we set up a charity or a company? What's the best way to do it so that we can actually be employed rather than be kind of independent contractors back to the
UK. Okay, interesting. Yeah, good. How about some other people?
I work out of the church environment,
Okay.
and we set up some trusts.
Trust?
And so our social enterprise work out of the trust environment.
Yes. Okay, so charitable trusts
Yes.
incorporated on the charitable trusts register?
Yes.
Okay. And registered as charities as well?
Yes.
Okay. And over here?
Limited liability company, and that's, I think pretty great in 5 years. Right now it sucks.
Why is that?
So I'm very much in the sort of scraping, trying to get to launch.
Yes.
I just wanted a big round application, joined with the charity, so I needed that umbrella body to be eligible for philanthropic funding.
Yes.
So yeah, it really wasn't an easy choice for me. I've gone this way, but it's still kind of a bit of tension there.
What's the focus of your social enterprise?
It's trying to improve outcomes for deaf kids is a big goal.
Okay.
So it's definitely a big why and purpose behind it.
Yes.
And there's potential, real market demand for it. So I want it to be sustainable. So that's why I went company route. But as I say, it's still kind of a bit of cost along the way as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So we've got a UK-based company / charity. We've got a church which operates with charitable trusts, and we've got a limited liability company as well. So it just shows the spectrum, doesn't it? There's a wide variety of options. And I think that one of the things is that there's no easy answer here. There's no one size cookie cutter fits all. It really does depend. But I do feel for, with Zoe and your endeavor with the company, going to people to get funding and not having the charity number restricts accessing grants, but equally the benefit of being able to get investors, it doesn't quite fit the commercial returns of a normal investment. So you're kind of caught in the middle between both sides, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, well that's good. Well, I think it shows the spectrum, and we had a question before, is that right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if there's other options, so maybe you start as one thing and then go to the contract, or can you set up a charity that then owns a company or a charity or
Yeah. So the question is, are there other options? Can you transition from charity to company or company to charity or other ways? I think what we often find is that people start as one and then realize they're missing out on the other, and so they end up becoming usually a charitable trust that owns a company, and that's very common. So there's a great example in Christchurch of Pathway, which helps ex-prisoners reintegrating back into society, and they're a charitable trust, and then they have 2 limited liability companies that operate. So it's trying to get the best of both. It's probably worth mentioning there are other options as well, like partnerships and sole trading, and it isn't just company and charity.
It is very common for there to be change along the way as well. We see that all the time. I can think of one charity that I'm involved with, which started off by actually establishing a limited liability company, and then after they received some advice, they realised actually for what we're trying to achieve it would make more sense for us to be a charitable trust. So then they created a charitable trust and incorporated that, and that did make sense. Now there's a particular project or separate venture that they're working on, and if that succeeds the way that they're hoping that it might, it will make sense to incorporate a limited liability company to operate that particular venture. So it's quite an interesting journey there. Actually, it was started just by volunteers, no legal structure at all. Then they went to a limited liability company, then to a charitable trust, and now potentially bringing in another limited liability company as well. Another education-focused business, which decided to, the owners of the business decided that they would set up a charitable trust and sell the business to the charitable trust because they thought that that would enable them to access more grant funding so that they could grow the scale of the services that they were providing. But what they found actually in working through that process is possibly what others of you who are in the charitable space have found. The competition for grant funding is pretty fierce, and even having the right structure to be eligible doesn't necessarily help you to get that funding because there are so many other charities competing for the same funding, which I think is one of the reasons why the whole social enterprise discussion has really picked up in the charitable sector, because people are saying there must be a better way to have sustainable income to achieve our purposes.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about some of these basic structures. There's no one size going to fit all, but some of the other things that you should be thinking about if you're in the process of setting up is getting a good governance body involved. So this is, if you're a trust, then that would probably be the trustees. So thinking through who is going to be providing guidance, who's going to be helping you, and if you're a company, who's on the board of directors. So in either structure, how many do you think is the right number to be on a board? Any ideas? There's no right answer, so don't worry.
I've always thought an odd number.
An odd
purely,
number?
Purely
Yeah.
so if these decisions that need to be voted on,
Yeah.
you've got
So
an
3
easy
or
way to
5
not
or
have a
something.
split vote. But yeah, I've always looked at probably around the 5 as your base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like about 5?
Again, I think it comes down to their voting side for starters.
Yep.
It makes it easy if there is decisions to be made, but it's also there's not too many voices at the table, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3's too small
Yeah.
because if you've got someone away, it just
Yes.
it makes it unworkable.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we should invite them up. That's basically right. We've had situations where people have said, I've got 12 people lined up to be on my board, and you just think, oh, can you imagine setting a time for 12 people to meet? Like, it's just, they're never going to be available at the same time. And what we're encouraging people to do now is think about, 3 at the very beginning or 5, but then having what we're calling an advisory council as a way to bring people in that you respect. You want them involved, but they don't necessarily have to be board members, and that can be a smaller group or a bigger group, but it's a way to legitimize their input as well. So it's not a strictly legal, I'm an advisory council member, but you are involved in that organization, and I think people are quite, flattered to be asked, would you like to be on the advisory board? So that's one strategy, because one of the other things to think through is who is it that's sitting around the table, and have you got a diversity of voices? Have you got somebody with a bit of accounting background, or have you got somebody who's pretty good at marketing, and trying to get not just all the same people as you, because that can be a danger if you're just basically echoing what the other person was going to say anyway. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess my only other thought as well is that it is really important to probably be thinking about who your target audience is for whatever you're going to be doing, or who your target customers are, or however you're going to phrase that, and then to what extent are they represented? Do they have a voice on your board as well? So I think Stephen's right to say there should be a focus on having a breadth of the expertise that you need on the board, but also having a breadth of voice on the board in terms of perspective, the sort of the client or recipient perspective, and how do you achieve that as well? So covering that range. It is, the bigger the number, the harder it is to reach a decision. I think that's a really valid concern, and having an odd number certainly helps, although just about every organisation that I've been involved with has always tried to reach decisions by consensus. And if you're consistently being deadlocked on decision making, I think it probably, there's probably some other issues going on there as well. So I don't think it's the end of the world to have 4 or 6. There have been the odd occasion where somebody's had to make a decision, and it's been helpful to say, okay, well, we've thrashed it out, we've heard all the views, but we need to make a decision and move forward, so let's go with the majority vote. But it doesn't happen as often as you might think that it does.
When talking, your board of directors or your advisory council, so what I do is I do a lot of stuff around suicide prevention. We've already got a relatively large platform. We're just looking at becoming a legal entity of some form.
Sure.
The catch, I think part of the catch, and I'm wondering whether you guys can answer, our team is international, our current team that we use to run what we do already. Is that doable within, I guess, New Zealand charities or social enterprise or business?
If they become directors or
to have them on that board.
Or trustees. It is legally permissible. So for a company, for example, you have to have at least one director who's based in New Zealand, or Australia is the other option, but if they're in Australia, they have to be a director of an Australian company as well. But you're only one, so you can have multiple directors who are overseas persons. It is permissible. And likewise with a trust, you can have overseas trustees. Depending on what sorts of status or grant funding or whatever you're going to be applying for, very often they'll want to know what the connection to New Zealand is. And so, again, having at least some representatives from New Zealand is very helpful in being able to demonstrate that connection, but legally it is permissible to have overseas trustees.
Yeah, which comes back as well to the charitable purpose of, if you're going down the charity route, you know, making sure that it's based in New Zealand, for New Zealand. There's rules around what does or doesn't qualify. And then, you know, if you're focused on overseas countries, then you're probably not going to qualify
so if you
for
were
the
looking
tax.
at doing something that's got abroad, where you're still going to be New Zealand based, New Zealand direct, I guess, purpose, but also having that same sort of purpose internationally as well. Which, I mean, this is where we are tossing up.
So company versus trust, you mean, or?
Yeah. Well, in regards to obviously what we're wanting to do, will have a massive impact in New Zealand, but we'll also want to be able to have just as much of an impact in, for instance, Australia, the States, Canada, UK.
I would actually probably be thinking about having different legal structures in different countries for a couple of reasons, and you may not necessarily do that right from the start, but with a view to getting there. One reason is if you're hoping to attract donor support in those various different countries, there'll need to be a recognised charitable status in the relevant country, so that somebody donating in Canada or the US to a New Zealand charity is unlikely to get any sort of tax benefits in their home country. So that would be one reason for doing that. But also from the New Zealand perspective, so as a charity, in order to, unless you're what's called a Schedule 32 charity, in order to be eligible for donor organisation status in New Zealand, you have to be applying your charitable funds wholly or mainly in New Zealand. And wholly or mainly is a concept that IRD are pursuing at the moment, because up until this year really, the accepted position has been that wholly or mainly means more than 50% in New Zealand. But IRD have challenged that in the last, well, probably in the last couple of years. They released a discussion paper where initially they said wholly or mainly should mean 90% or more in New Zealand.
So that'd be of grants that you were granted by New Zealand?
It's a very, no, as an organisation, you have, if you're a New Zealand registered charity, to get those charitable benefits in New Zealand, you have to apply wholly or mainly in New Zealand, and they say they had said that means 90%. So it's not really a question of where the money came from, it's a question of what percentage of the money that you're applying are you applying in New Zealand. They've come back from that, and the tax statement or interpretation statement that they've released, so it's still in draft.
I think they haven't released exactly yet, but they're consulting, and it's likely it will be less than 90%, but more than 50%. Yeah. So I think that's the current status.
So again, coming back to, if you know that you're going to be operating in multiple countries, if it's likely that your percentage of funding that's being applied in New Zealand is going to drop below, what's the number, 75%, 66%, somewhere, then you're not going to be eligible for donor organisation status in New Zealand in that scenario.
So just coming back to the the structure that you choose, we talked about the governance, the importance of good governance. One of the other really critical things that I think people don't spend enough time on is what's your mission, articulating it really clearly. So sometimes we see people come in and there's an idea, but we ask them to go a bit deeper, like, okay, well, what exactly are you going to do? And they can't crystallize it well. And it is worth spending a lot of time working out. It doesn't have to be long, it could be 3 bullet points, but being really clear about what your mission is, who is it that you're trying to help or reach or be involved with. So in that sense, having a statement is really important, and one of the things we're doing a lot with social enterprise companies that we're assisting is we're coming up with a new template for social enterprise companies. So there's never really been a template, because it hasn't existed, 2 years ago even, it wasn't really a common thing. So this template, right at the beginning, has a clause that says what the mission is of the company, and then really all of the provisions that flow after that hinge back to what the mission was stated to be. So I think that's really a rigorous thing. With charities, you often will go through this process because you have to prove, if you're becoming a charity, that you are achieving charitable purposes in order to get registered as a charity with charity services. So it does force you to think through what's my purpose. And if you're heading down that route, the key thing is it's not just good stuff, it's not just helping people learn about this particular thing. It has to be within the 4 heads of charity. So that's advancing education, relief of poverty, advancing religion, and purposes beneficial to the community. So those are kind of the silos, I guess. So just because you have a good idea, my point is just because you have a good idea, it doesn't mean that it will necessarily be a charitable purpose. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time with people doing is reflecting on what they want to achieve and expressing it in a way that shows the charitable parts and the purpose that they want to achieve.
You mentioned you were developing a template. Is that something that you
Yeah.
can get access to?
Yeah, we're just in the process, so we've used it with a couple social enterprise clients, and yeah, it's something that we're still refining and developing. But if you're interested, happy to have a discussion about it, and our intention is that we will, keep making it better, and hopefully it will become something that can set a standard, because right now there's not really anything. Yeah, exactly. So in it, we cause number 1 is simply this is a company that's there, existing as a social enterprise. Cause number 2 is what's the mission of the company and being really clear about what that is. And we used it with someone up in Auckland actually, and they articulated it in 3 bullet points, and it was really nice. And then there's some optional clauses, which if we wanted to go deeper here, we put in an asset lock clause, which talks about what you can do with the assets if the company winds up. That's kind of a controversial topic, because some people would say you don't need to asset lock, and others would say you should asset lock. I don't think you need to still be a social enterprise. And then we've got an advisory council as an optional thing. And we've got reporting standards, like how often are you going to tell people how you're doing on your mission. And then we've got something about profit redistribution, what percentage of your profits are going to go back into the mission. So most of the causes that come afterwards relate back to the mission and how it's being fulfilled. And I think that's really important to have that rigor around, here's our mission and here's how we're actually taking concrete steps, rather than just, here's our mission and that's all, Yeah.
I've heard the phrase constitution for a company. Is that particularly what a constitution is?
Yeah, that's right.
So in New Zealand, if you're a limited liability company, you'll be incorporated under the Companies Act 1993. The Companies Act has a whole lot of rules in it about what you have to do to properly operate a company. It's not compulsory to have a constitution for a New Zealand company, but you can have a constitution, and it can add to and modify, in some cases, the default rules in the Companies Act. And it can deal with things like rights of preemption relating to the sale of shares, rights to appoint directors, how meetings happen, how voting happens, what kinds of shares you can create. So there's a whole range of different things that it can cover. There's a bit of flexibility as to what you can put in your constitution. But there are some rules, so there are some things where you have to follow what the Companies Act says. But there are some areas, and including mission and purpose statements as an example, where there is a bit of flexibility, and an ability to be somewhat creative with how you draft your constitution. So it's not a mandatory document, but it can be it's often a helpful document for other reasons, but if you're a social enterprise, it can be a very helpful document in terms of publicly documenting your purposes as a social enterprise.
Profit distribution?
Yes. Because it's a public document, so anyone can search the company's register and see, does this company have a constitution? If so, what does it say? And if the shareholders have resolved to adopt a constitution, they do have to abide by the rules in it. So for as long as that constitution is in place, they're fixed with it. So again, it's possible to be a charitable limited liability company. And if you are a charitable limited liability company, then it's essentially it becomes mandatory to have a constitution that does impose those charitable restrictions on what you do.
And the point is that this is a publicly available document, which is why it forces the directors to publicly say, here's our mission, our purpose, here's what we're doing with our profits, here's a bit about our dividend policy, and you can specify how many directors there will be and things. But then equal with that is something that isn't necessarily public. Well, it wouldn't be public, a shareholders agreement. So that's a document which is private among the shareholders of the company. So people get confused about this, but basically Constitution is public, outward facing, shareholders agreement is private, inward facing, and it says that Kris and I own shares in this company, and here's how we're going to treat each other regarding that investment. So that can be important because we might agree something like, if I want to sell shares to this particular person, then do I need to offer them to Kris first, or can I just sell them without going to him? And so we might want to document that type of thing in our own private document. Yeah, so we've covered a bit about governance, and we've covered a bit about some of the documents that you might need. We could go many different directions now. One thing I'd like to raise is intellectual property, because I think it's important. You probably have an idea which is unique or different, and I think it's important that you are aware of what intellectual property is, and the importance of making sure that you actually own what you think you own. So Kris and I had an experience where a client thought they owned something and went back and checked the agreement with the web developer, the person who'd helped them, and actually there was a clause there that said that they did not own what they thought they owned. So that makes it very difficult if you come to sell your company, or you think that you own software that's been created for you, for example. So the key point here is, it sounds basic, but read the terms and conditions of your suppliers and make sure that you own what it is that you think you own. And then be clear about what it is that you're creating that is of value. So that can range from logos and names that you can actually trademark. And that's actually not a difficult, expensive process. It's about $150 to do that. And there's lots of great guidance on the IPON's website. So sometimes we'll just say, rather than having us do it, you should do it yourself, like it's fairly straightforward. So that's one type of intellectual property, is the name and website, domain names. But also just thinking through what it is that you own. Is it something that you're going to keep as a trade secret so that nobody can find out about it, and therefore they won't know how you do it? So that's the sort of the secret sauce of, the secret recipe of Coca-Cola, or special ingredients that are used that you don't know how they make it taste so good. Or do you want to go down a more formal route, like a patent, and actually try to patent your idea? So obviously every situation is unique and different. With patents, it can take time and cost money, and I've seen some people get so engrossed in making sure that they've patented and protected their idea that they forget that if they just focused on being the market leader and actually gotten on and done what they were thinking they would do, they probably would have outstripped any other competitors. So it's kind of a balancing act there in terms of how much you need to focus on protection versus just getting on with your idea. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. IP.
It's one of those things where it's important to start the way you mean to continue by being careful and documenting what you're doing and keeping records of who's creating what and all those sorts of things. So it's an area, like others with any sort of new structure that you set up, you do actually need to put some record keeping in place right from the start.
Yeah.
I wonder whether we pause at this stage and just see, are there any other particular questions that you have that we can answer? There's a number of topics we can talk about, but you've probably got questions. So,
can I just, before we go to that question, I just wanted to show this. So this is the Startups Legal Toolkit. So it's a book, it's about 100 pages, and it covers many of the issues that we've been talking about, but it probably goes into more detail than we could, given the context of this environment and things. But we've got chapters in here about intellectual property and ongoing duties of directors and different things. So if you're interested, again, happy to email it out to people. Just drop us a line. Yeah, but you had a question?
Yeah, my question was about employment. So we set up in Urban Farm earlier this year, so far as we set up phase and all volunteers that we're wanting to employ people. So just keen to understand a bit about the interaction between employees and volunteers. And can you have someone that you employ for 20 hours a week who then volunteers an extra 20 hours a week, and seems like it could be a bit of a minefield.
it is a bit of a minefield, I think. So firstly, do you have a legal structure in terms of the entity?
Yeah, so we're under a brother trust.
Okay.
That's a brother church.
Okay.
So it's some of the trusts to sort of grow social enterprise.
Great.
Okay. Community-based.
Okay. And so it's that trust that will be employing people?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that trust have other employees at the moment as well?
No, at the moment.
Okay. So
the question really comes back to employees for 20 hours and then they volunteer for 20 hours and any crossover and difficulty. Yeah.
So one thing would be, what's their job description as an employee? How many hours, so if you're saying it's 20 hours a week to achieve this job description, is that a job description that can be achieved in 20 hours? Or are you actually asking them to do something that, even though they're volunteering beyond that, in truth it's just achieving the paid employment that's been agreed to anyway? And depending on remuneration rates, if the actual hours that they're working are significantly longer than the agreed hours, you might run into issues with if you're getting close to the minimum wage, for example, going below that. So that's one area. If the volunteering is truly and clearly distinct from the employment, then it could be okay. I mean, in practice, it happens. It's certainly not uncommon for somebody to volunteer beyond their paid employment. That happens in lots of different fields. And I guess at the end of the day, part of the question is that particular person ever going to, take a personal grievance against you and say, you haven't been paying me enough per hour for the last 3 years, you owe me, calculate it with reference to the minimum wage. And if somebody's passionate about what you're doing, it may be that that's a low risk, pragmatically speaking, with that person. But to the extent that there is a possible confusion between what's paid employment, or the job description, or there's no clear demarcation between the job description for the paid employment and the volunteering, then there potentially would be issues with that.
Could you get around that with the people contract?
Yeah, well, I think part of that is carefully defining the job description and saying this is what we're paying you for.
Yeah, but a contract for the volunteer hours as well. Or a job description for those hours.
It's an interesting one because by definition it's voluntary, isn't it? So can you contract to volunteer your time?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, There are lots of voluntary organisations where there are job descriptions for volunteers.
Yes, but it'd be hard to say that
Is that a contract?
Is that actually a legal contract that they're committed to? It's a
But
helpful
it's an understanding.
It's a helpful document.
It's a helpful document.
It's a helpful piece of evidence. Yeah.
Or is it something you can put in the contract that makes allowance for voluntary, so it's not contracted that they're not voluntary, but
Makes it clear that it is voluntary. Yeah.
because I guess we'll have so currently we've got someone who's volunteering,
Yes.
pretty much full time, and
Yeah.
we want to start paying them. But yeah, it's just should tread that line and making sure
Yeah.
we're doing all above board.
I definitely know people in practice who are doing exactly that, and it hasn't caused them any issues so far. But whether it could cause them issues, again, I think even if you have a well-written employment contract that deals with the possibility of choosing to volunteer and making it clear that that's purely voluntary and there's no obligation to do so and all those sorts of things. I mean, that's the same sort of principle that arises with, you get the arguments about somebody who's on call or is required under their job description to be available through the night for their role. And then that person, if it's a requirement of their job description to be available through the night for a role, then potentially you have to be paying them the minimum wage at least for those hours that they're required to be available. If on the other hand you look at the documentation and it clearly is not a requirement and they choose to be there, then that's a different scenario. So what the contract says is important, but what you're actually doing in practice is important as well. And so even if the contract says it's voluntary, if all of your practice shows that it's not voluntary and that you actually have to do it, you're still potentially in trouble.
The other thing I'd add, and I'm not an employment lawyer, I should have to say that, but the difference between an employee and a contractor, and being clear about, well, do we really want this person as an employee, or can they be a contractor on a short-term basis, with defined description? Because I think there's probably less obligations, if you're contracting someone rather than employing them. So that might be something to think through as well. But as you've discovered, every situation is unique and it depends on the circumstances. The reality is if somebody's volunteering, like Kris said, I always view it commercial risk. I was in-house as a lawyer in large organizations for a while, so I wasn't in a law firm. I was actually in the client as a lawyer working, and we always used to think, well, what's the commercial risk here? Legally, how does it pan out? And then what's the chance that somebody who clearly loves the idea of an urban farm wants to volunteer 100% of their time, and now you're going to pay them to do half of it? The chances of them bringing a personal grievance would be very slim, probably. But it's up to you to work out, every situation is unique. Yeah.
Could you possibly put them on salary, and then sort of subcontract out as just the job itself, for the job to be done, but with maybe not the time frame, but the cost of the job to be like, this is a $500 job for the week.
If it's a contractor scenario, then if somebody's an independent contractor and they agree a fixed price for a job and they're genuinely and properly being treated as an independent contractor, then that's fine, no problem with that. If they are in substance an employee, then there's still going to be a potential analysis or argument as to how many hours was it actually required to complete that work. For your average employee, how long would it take them to do that work? And you're still going to have to comply with obligations like the minimum wage obligations.
Yeah.
Kris, before you mentioned about the option of having a charitable limited liability company.
Yes.
Can you just talk through that a little bit more?
Sure. So, in order to be a charity, you have to exist for a charitable purpose. In order to register with Charity Services, there's some key things that they want to look at. First of all, what are the charitable purposes that you're trying to achieve? And so in your case, it sounds like advancement of education is going to be there, so you're probably going to be okay on that front.
Yeah.
And then they also look at issues like can anyone benefit privately from what's going on here? And if this entity is ever wound up, where are all the assets going to go at the end of that process? And in each of those cases, it needs to be basically, nobody can profit privately from this. They might be able to be paid a fair market wage for what they're doing, or for the services that they're supplying, but they can't profit beyond that. And in the case of winding up, the proceeds of the assets or whatever need to go towards charitable purposes. So there's some things that you have to do to meet the requirements to be registered as a charity in New Zealand. But it's possible to adopt a constitution for a limited liability company that ticks all of those boxes, and therefore that company becomes eligible to be registered as a charity. There are a couple of interesting questions about that. One is that under the Companies Act, the shareholders under the Act can vote to replace the Constitution at any time. And so, as a matter of legal principle, even if you've adopted a charitable constitution, the shareholders have a statutory right to revoke that constitution. So there's an interesting question there that nobody's really addressed.
But each year, as a charity, do you have to be reporting information?
Yeah, so once you're registered as a charity, you're going to be reporting to charity services, and also even if you do revoke that constitution and cease to be charitable, it's going to have some pretty significant tax implications for you. So there'll be a 12-month period, and at the end of that 12-month period, then there's income tax payable on the capital value of your assets, for example, some things like that. So there are some safeguards in place, but the other thing, if you are a limited liability company and as a charity, the other question that is an interesting question and doesn't have a single answer is who will the shareholders of that company be? Because you still need to have shareholders. So will there be a charity that's the shareholder, or could a private individual be a shareholder? And actually the answer seems to be that a private individual could still be the shareholder, but they can't personally profit from the activities of the company, which is unusual because in order to be validly a charity, you can't have private individuals profiting. So even though they're a shareholder, they have to be a shareholder that has no ability to profit. But there are a lot of charitable companies registered in New Zealand. I would say most often they are charitable companies that have been set up by charitable trusts. The shareholder is a charitable trust. In some of those cases, they choose not to register the company as a charity, but in other cases, they say we want the company to be a charity as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, actually, once you start getting into it. And just to pick up on the charity thing, since there seems to be a bit of interest, we've done some information about how to apply to become a charity. But one thing to bear in mind is that there is time involved. So it doesn't necessarily take us long to help to draft a deed or a constitution that will tick the boxes of being charitable, but you send it away to Charity Services, and right now you get an email back that says, thank you for your application, we'll be with you in 4 months. So there's definitely a lag. So just if you are thinking about going down the charitable route, make sure you build that into your time frames, because it can take longer than people expect to get that, and they may have questions as well, so it could be longer, yeah.
They can backdate it, but even so, you're going to have a period of uncertainty until the decision comes through.
Yeah. Having said that, there is a way you can ask for a fast tracking if there's a special circumstance or a need. So we acted for a church recently which was going to do some building, and they had a deadline that they had to have it done by. They had a funder who wanted to give them the money to do it right now, and those seemed to be enough reasons for Charity Services to process it. It was a fairly straightforward application, and I was shocked at how quickly I got it back. Honestly, it was like, wow, that was very fast. So it can happen, but I wouldn't put your eggs in that basket for sure. is a definite process. We were involved in a conference earlier in the year in April held at Te Papa, and there were 200 people who came together who were accountants and lawyers and not-for-profits, and we actually recorded all of the sessions using that camera and uploaded them on a website. So again, if anyone's interested, we can send you a link, and there's like 12 hours of content about charitable purpose and what should be and what shouldn't be in social enterprise and impact investing and what does the future hold and all that. So it's quite interesting. I think what we might do now is sort of wrap up the formal part. I'll be around for a bit longer if you have questions, and we're happy to take them. Maybe just some things to finish off with. We have a website called perryfield.com. Is it .co.nz? And both, isn't it? Yeah, both will work. Either one is fine. But if you go there, about halfway down, there's something called Change for Good, and that's like a sub-website of our website, and it's all focused on not-for-profits and charities. Our firm has been around for 70 years. This is actually our 70th year, and traditionally we've done a lot in the not-for-profit sector, and only relatively recently realized that social enterprise fit within that as well. So we've put up a bunch of templates, articles, videos, and free resources basically for people who are interested. So that's the Change for Good website. And then we have another one called Innovate, which is really focused on startups and what you need to think about when you're in the process of setting up and starting up. So that's at the same place. You'll see it, you find it easily. And again, we've got templates and documents and information available there. And I just want to mention as well, on the tables there, I've put a sign-up sheet because we try to email out for people relevant information. So if you're interested, we have an email newsletter for like the Change for Good charity area. And we'll try to do these sessions this is the third one we've done. I think we enjoy it. It's fun to get out and meet you all, and so we can let you know when they're coming up. But also if there's updates like this sort of stuff, we'll let people know. And the last thing is that I'm doing a podcast called Seeds, so there's some information on the tables as well. So every week on a Tuesday morning I'm uploading an interview, and today I uploaded the 57th interview, and that's all been done since September last year, so in a year. So basically one a week, and really focusing on entrepreneurs and social enterprises and trying to tell good stories about what people are doing. So Zoe over here has been on the podcast if you want to hear about Talktown and her work with deaf children. It's really fascinating. And real variety. My aim with it is to surprise the listeners that every week you'll be like, oh, that's completely different to the previous week. So I recently talked with someone about nutrition and mental health, and today it was about open source software and whether that's a good thing, which he thought it was, and I tend to agree. So it's quite just trying to get some good stories out in Christchurch because there's a lot going on here. So yeah, I'm just looking for people to help to spread the word about it as a good way to tell stories.
Jason, did you have it?
Yeah, sorry, so I had a question before we wrap up. So it sounds like a lot of people in the room are kind of grappling with potential legal structures. What do you see, I said Stephen, I'm very good with Stephen, sorry. What do you see as being the major advantages or disadvantages of charitable trust versus a LLC? Charitable and LLC.
Do you want to do one of them and I'll do the other?
Limited liability company, I'll do that one. If you're unsure where it's going to go and whether you may want to profit personally in some form from what you're doing, then it's better to start with a limited liability company. It's more flexible in that sense. You're not locking yourself into saying, I'm definitely going to be charitable. And then commercially, in terms of getting funding, financing from banks, those sorts of things, they understand it, it fits their model better. It's not that they don't lend to charities, they obviously do. But a limited liability company that they can see as operating for profit ticks their boxes a bit easier.
Yeah, I agree. And then for the charity side of things, for better or worse, there's still an association that a charity is a good thing, and people will give you money if you're a charity. So that's the first thing. It's just the status of, are you a charity or not? Oh, you're a charity? Oh, you've gone through some hurdles, and I trust you. So there's that part of it. And then the second thing is, if you're a registered charity, then you actually can give tax-deductible receipts to people who donate funds to you. So, you know, with Zoe, if you go out to people and you say, hey, I've got Talktown, would you like to donate me money? Maybe they will, but if you say you'll get a tax deduction, you know, you'll get some reimbursement of your donation, then they're more likely to give you those donations. But the downside of it is what we've been talking about, is that you can't get private investors. So that you can't say, hey, Chris, would you like to invest $15,000 to get 100 shares in my charitable trust? You can't raise money that way. So it does limit your ability to access funding if you're a charity.
Are there limitations on trading activities? So for that reason, for example, if a charitable trust employed to do and they wanted to start selling veggies from their own farm, are they allowed to do that as a charitable trust?
There's no limitations other than what the trading activities need to further the charitable purposes of the charity. So you can and that can be furthering it in an indirect way. So you can sell a product that's not that closely related to your charitable purposes, if you can justify that as helping you to achieve those charitable purposes. So that's the constraint.
And that actually raises the point that I was making before about mission and purpose, like what are you doing? And having it clearly articulated is so critical, because we've actually seen situations where people haven't read their trustee that they've been appointed as a trustee of. And actually that should be the first step. Like if somebody asks you to be a trustee, one of your first questions should be, can I see the trustee? You know, it's an honor to be asked, this is wonderful, but what are you actually asking me to do? Because the purpose, what happens sometimes, let's say it was set up in, you know, 1963, and nobody's really gotten the trustee out for that long, and then you open it and it's like, oh, what we're doing now is drifted from what we originally, our purpose said we were doing, and maybe we're no longer within the remit of our original purpose, which is not a good thing. So that can happen. And we even had, we've seen one of our colleagues where he was helping a charitable entity, and they had lost their deed because they were set up like 100 years ago, and so nobody had read the purposes for decades. And then they eventually found a copy, and you know, yeah. So just on that point as well, if somebody asks you to be a trustee of a trust, it's fine to do it, but you are taking on liability as a trustee, so don't just do it for the sake of the honor of having been asked. Actually think about it and make sure that you're aligned with what they want to achieve, because it's, yeah, everybody loves to be asked, would you like to be a trustee, but I think sometimes the trusts themselves are doing a disservice to their potential trustees by not informing them and actually explaining what it is that they expect if you become a trustee. The problem is we're desperate for volunteers, right? We need people.
What is if someone, if you're a charitable trust registered and someone makes a donation, what percentage do they get?
As a rebate?
Yeah.
Or they don't call them rebates anymore, I forget what they call them now. Tax credit or something? 33%. Well, yeah, 33%. Unless your marginal tax rate is lower, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah.
You used to have a cap, didn't it?
Yeah, well, up until probably 10 years ago, it was capped at the most you could claim the rebate in relation to was a donation up to $5,000 for an individual. So the biggest rebate you could ever get was 1.66 or whatever that is. 1,666, but that's one of the reasons actually why the government is very closely scrutinising and more closely scrutinising charities than what it used to, is because that cap's been moved so people can claim quite significant rebates, and of course that creates the possibility of tax evasion and just appropriation of charitable funds and all this.
So I think it just remains to say thank you so much for coming out this evening. We know it's a wintry day, but spring is on the way, and we just wish you all the best with your various ventures across so many different sectors and areas. It's been really good to chat with you and hear your questions, and yeah, just feel free to drop us an email, and we've got different resources that we've mentioned. But thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.